Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another week on the Debrief. This week, Pope Francis publishes a new document focusing on Saint Teresa of Lisieux, then the latest from the Synod, and then a new book, Credo. Is it a problematic traditionalist catechism? Hey, Mike, how you been? We've been off for a week and now we're back.
Yeah, it's been an incredibly busy couple of weeks with the start of the Synod and a whole bunch of other things coming down the pike. As you know, at Where Peter Is, we published a two-part series on focusing on a female adult survivor of grooming by her parish priest and an alleged sexual assault. Um, Obviously, making sure that that article was written properly and fairly, and gave her voice as well as allowing the diocese an opportunity to respond. And that took up most of my week last week. And on top of that, the Synod has been going on. Um, the dubia issues are still ongoing. The attacks from the traditionalist movement have been ongoing. Um, we had a couple of issues when it came to our coverage of the traditionalist movement. Anyway, all of this has been going on, and then Pope Francis drops a brand new exhortation. It's been so much going on, but I am glad that we are finally able to get together today, this afternoon.
Agreed. Agreed. So we're going to breeze through the first 2 points, which are really important because you've pulled together a 19-slide walkthrough of this problematic catechism. So let's get into this. Friends, welcome to the Debrief. It's we do our best to make it a weekly show where we talk about news, questions, and controversies facing the Catholic Church. I'm Dominic DeSouza, the founder of Smart Catholics.
And I am Mike Lewis, the co-founder and editor of the website Where Peter Is.
So let's start with this new Apostolic Exhortation. Yesterday, Pope Francis published an exhortation entitled C'est la confiance, it's the confidence, dedicated to Saint Teresa of the Child Jesus and the Holy Face. You wrote a reflection on it last night. I haven't got a chance to read it yet. Maybe you can tell us your impressions.
Yeah, so just a little bit of background, because I know actually we forecast this back when Pope Francis went to the hospital back in June. If you remember, he went to the hospital Tuesday, June 6th, I believe, came back after a couple of hours, delivered his audience Wednesday, June 7th, and then the news came out that he had headed straight to the hospital after his audience for surgery. During that audience, his focus was, well, first of all, he was talking about mission, and his focus was on Therese of Lisieux, who as and it's funny because she has a lot of different names. She has Therese of the Child Jesus. She has the Little Flower. She's beloved. She's a doctor of the Church, despite living only 24 years and never leaving her Carmelite monastery. And Pope Pius XI, after canonizing her, named her and St. Francis Xavier as co-patrons of the missions. Now, St. Francis Xavier, obviously, he is one of the world's most famous missionaries in the history of the Church. He went to India, evangelized there. Then from India, he went to Japan. Then he tried to get to China, but he got ill and didn't make it there. But the number of baptisms, the number of people that he evangelized, I mean, it's one of those things. He was great friends with Saint Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, and at their parting, they knew they would never see each other again because Saint Francis was just out there. He's a bold evangelist. He's an inspiration. There's a great documentary that I think you can find on YouTube. It's about an hour long. It's narrated by Liam Neeson. It was produced by Jesuits. So Jeremy Zippel, who is an American Jesuit, and he used to work for America Magazine. He was he was the filmmaker.
Wow.
Anyway, that's St. Francis Xavier. That's not what this exhortation was about. So a couple of things that make this a little bit unique. It was elevated to an apostolic exhortation, which is the same level as Well, we had Laudate Deum just a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if 2 apostolic exhortations have come out in the same month. Both of them are very short. Both of them are under 10,000 words, I think in the 7,000 to 8,000 word range. But it's also the same type of document that Amoris Laetitia was, Christus Vivit, Evangelii Gaudium, which remains one of my favorite, probably the #1 document of Pope Francis still. It was his first apostolic exhortation. Although I think that this beautiful little letter, or I guess exhortation, about Saint Therese might be a close #2, and actually maybe because of its length. One of the things I wrote in my article was that as the exhortation wore on, I started to think to myself, this reminds me a lot of Evangelii Gaudium. And then I think in paragraph 48, Pope Francis writes, I spoke about, the mission of the Christian and evangelization in Evangelii Gaudium, and I want to repropose that right here, right now for you. Here's the big question. How is a woman in her early 20s from France, without a big university education, without a huge theological formation, how is she the patron of the missions? She's never gone on a mission. She traveled to Rome as a teenager, but once she was in the cloister, she was there. Well, the tradition of the church has been that one of the main goals of the cloistered life, the consecrated contemplative life, is to assist the church with their prayers. And Saint Therese, even though she is often portrayed as a very quiet, pious, perfect for a prayer card, beautiful young nun who is undergoing, is praying her rosary and doing her little things. She was united with the missions. She saw herself as a missionary. She saw herself as participating in that mission. And this is what Pope Francis wanted to emphasize. He wanted to go beyond what besides these nice things that, the prayer, the sacrifice, the offering up, the devotion, what besides the piety, that not that there's anything wrong with those things, but what distinguishes Saint Therese from other saints? What does she bring to the church that other saints don't have? And the term that he used is confidence. Now, it's funny because when we think of religious confidence, one of the first things that came to my mind was the idea of, I don't know if you remember back in 2012 when the world was going to end, and Harold Camping, the radio minister, was so confident that the world was going to end on a certain date that he and his followers got rid of all their belongings, and they were confident, and then they were made to look foolish. We can remember the ends of some pretty scary cults started by Americans in the last 40 or 50 years. You think of Jonestown, you think of the Hale-Bopp Comet community. They were confident that they were going to cross over into something else. This is not what Pope Francis is talking about. Pope Francis is talking about, rather than putting your confidence in ideas, in your assumptions, in your ideologies, in your attachments, on the way you think things should turn out or the way things should be. No, you put your total confidence in God's love and mercy. And that is what Saint Therese did. I highlight one passage where he talks about, at a certain point, Saint Therese was unable to receive the Eucharist every day. And I don't know, obviously nowadays it's standard practice for nuns in cloisters to have a priest come and give them, a private mass and to give them the Eucharist and confession on a daily basis. But he talks about how Therese, even though it was devastating to her, because it was what God was doing in her life at that moment. She accepted it as a gift from God, and she asked God to make her a tabernacle when she wasn't able to receive. And I wrote in the article that it seemed to me almost a mild rebuke of some of the people during COVID who were demanding that, we must have
their
access to
rights.
Mass. We must, I must be able to receive communion on the tongue. All these, it has to be their way on their time, according to the way that they want it. And I mean, he didn't make any reference to this, so you can blame me, don't blame him. But it just struck me that this was maybe a little bit of like, even spiritual things, even good things, if we develop unhealthy attachments to them, they can lead to loss of faith, despair, or sinfulness, like pride or the false kind of confidence. So anyway, it's a short document. We'll provide the link. Take a look at my article if you want. It's just sort of my initial thoughts on one reading of this short document. Be read in one sitting. It's very clear, and it brings a lot of her witness to light. So that's what I have to say about that. And I hope you read it after this, after we record this, Dominic.
I will. So the Synod is now entering its second full week. Do you have any inside information about that?
Not really.
All right. Next
so
topic.
it's let me just to give you so obviously all these other things are going on. All of these where Peter is type things are going on, like this book Credo, like various things that are going on. I mean, EWTN, different people trying to distract from the Synod. It seems to me that the full-fledged this year, the fear that is being spread during the Synod is straight up fear. It's this message that they're trying to undermine the faith. It seems that in the last few days, various Synod participants have leaked information anonymously, whether it's true or not. And they've been pretty good on the whole of adhering to the silence that's been, or to the secrecy that's been requested of them. So take everything with a grain of salt. But apparently in the last few days, they've been talking about some of the hot button issues. I saw a report that women deacons was one of the subjects that was supposed to be discussed today. Within the last couple of days, I know that they talked about LGBT issues. And I know that Paolo Ruffini, who's the head of Vatican communications, came out and said that the main rule, or the main consensus that was reached, was that homophobia is wrong. Obviously, how do we minister to people who either live a certain lifestyle or who are homosexual, gay, lesbian? How we want to be inclusive, we want to be welcoming. How do we do that as a church while preserving our beliefs by preserving the doctrine of the church? So pray for the success of the Synod, and like Saint Therese, I would advise that you have confidence that God will provide, in light of the Synod. For coverage, I would recommend Inside the Vatican podcast done by America magazine, and as well as Jesuitical. So I found Jesuitical's coverage of what is a Synod and what's supposed to happen during the Synod and those kinds of things. I found those very helpful. I've found Colleen Dully and Jerry O'Connell is my favorite podcast besides the ones that I'm in. Inside the Vatican, they've always given really good insight about what Pope Francis is up to. They've cut through some of the rumors, and they've added a lot of needed clarification. So I will add the links. I know that I'm a subscriber to America's digital edition. It's $5 a month, but for new subscribers, apparently it's $1 a month with access to everything. Now, a lot of it is free. Your favorite podcast app has these two podcasts, but I would recommend that. So
Good deal. Good deal. Well, talking about confidence and then fear, let's talk about this Credo document. So, last month, Sophia Institute Press published a book by Bishop Athanasius Schneider entitled Credo, Compendium of the Catholic Faith. And according to the publisher's description of Credo, this book is significant in that, for the first time in over 50 years, a Catholic bishop has published his own complete and authoritative presentation of the faith, what to believe, how to live, and how to pray as Christ taught. And them's fighting words. I mean, the publisher also says that Credo is a comprehensive summary of Christian doctrine written for our time by a living successor of the apostles. I've been following your Twitter over the last couple of days, and you have another take on this, and you've put together maybe an overview of some slides or something. Can you just, what are your initial takes on this document? What are your impressions?
So this is just a little bit of an overview. It's interesting because Bishop Athanasius Schneider is one of the names that has he's he goes on the speaker tour. He's there with Cardinal Burke and with Eric Sammons. He's one of the well-known traditionalist speakers. He opposes Pope Francis. He's done it publicly. But a lot of people don't know who he is in the mainstream church. But there are a few reasons why this is troubling to me, and this book is troubling to me. And then there are some facts to help people get up to speed with precisely why I believe this book is troubling. First, who is Bishop Athanasius Schneider? So he is an auxiliary bishop in Astana, which is in Kazakhstan. It's a majority Muslim country. And these statistics, as of 2013, it's an archdiocese. It has 60,000 Catholics, which make up 1.6% of the population of the archdiocese. There are 34 parishes and 17 priests. So obviously, kind of like Mongolia, it's a wide swath of land. So I assume that that's the reason why they need an auxiliary bishop. Most places don't, by comparison, I think Tyler has 52,000 Catholics. So, and that's obviously not an archdiocese, and it's considered a very small diocese, no auxiliary bishop. So he's sort of in this, country in Asia where there aren't many Catholics, and yet somehow he is a household name among a certain subset of Catholics.
Right.
So, a little bit more about him. He has been an open supporter of the Society of Saint Pius X, which is that movement that was, is in an irregular situation with the church. It was founded by the French Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre in the 1970s. He and four other bishops of the movement, four other members of the movement were excommunicated by Pope John Paul II in 1988 when he ordained them, these priests, as bishops without the permission of the church. He died in, I believe, 1991. This schism or break between the mainstream church were not in full communion. The Catholic Church has not recognized their priests or bishops as exercising any kind of legitimate ministry in the church, although in around the year of mercy, which was, I believe, 2015, 2016, Pope Francis did grant faculties to these priests to validly hear confessions, and he arranged so that they can get validly and licitly married in the church. Up until that point, these were bishops and chapels that were operating without any authorization from the church, and therefore they had no bishop that would grant them faculties to give absolution validly or to marry couples validly. So for decades, members are, they'd have their weddings there, they'd confess their sins there, and there were questions about the validity of those sacraments. So Pope Francis rectified that. Naturally, they acted like, and we've covered the SSPX before, but you give them an inch and they take a mile. So they acted like that this confirmed that their sacraments were valid all along, and that they, anyway. For some reason, in 2015, Bishop Schneider conducted what he claims was an official visitation of 2 SSPX seminaries on behalf of the Holy See. He told the traditionalist blog Rorate Caeli in 2015, "To my knowledge, there are no weighty reasons in order to deny the clergy and the faithful of the SSPX the official canonical recognition. Meanwhile, they should be accepted as they are." Now, this is in contrast to what Pope John Paul II said about them, Pope Benedict, Cardinal Mueller, even Cardinal Burke. They don't recognize their local bishops. They don't recognize a lot of Vatican II. They think Vatican II is heretical. They think the Pope is heretical. They won't. They don't even like it when their members go to a Latin Mass that's done in communion with the Catholic Church, like the Fraternal Society of St. Peter or a diocesan Latin Mass. Like they are separate. They're their own. They have their own world. It would be nice if they would reunify, but it doesn't seem that the current leadership has any intention to submit to Vatican II or to accept the laicity of the reforms of Vatican II in the liturgy. It's a sticky situation. Now, I have never seen any confirmation other than from SSPX sources and other traditionalist sources that this was really a Vatican approved visitation. Unfortunately, it seems that people just take this on his word and assume that he did. But I've looked really hard into it. There's no public information about who authorized it in the Vatican, what department he was doing it for, other than coming out and saying that everything that they that they're doing is great and they should be welcomed back into the church. I haven't seen any signs of that. So that's certainly a concern to me. Now, there more recently, he's said other things. He's continued to defend the SSPX. He said that they aren't in schism, which is a probable opinion, but he's adamantly against it. He's even defended their opposition to the Pope because coming into communion right now, according to him, is not a good idea because of Pope Francis. And then in 2022, he described their founder, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, as a prophet for our time. So, just to give you a background about his ideology, other things that he's known for. Outspoken anti-vaxxer, he wrote and he signed several manifestos about the obligation to resist COVID vaccine. The COVID vaccine, he repudiated the CDF, he repudiated the Pontifical Institute for Life, he repudiated Pope Francis. Basically, he said we have an obligation not to get vaccinated, in contrast to what the official church has said. He's accused Pope Francis explicitly of heresy several times. The one that comes to mind personally is the same one that that Bishop Strickland signed, the against the liturgical document Desiderio Desideravi. We've written 2 responses to that. It's basically based on poor reading comprehension and desperation. They say that Pope Francis has violated the infallible teaching of the Council of Trent, but they even cite the wrong scripture passage. It's a long story. He's a regular speaker at traditionalist events, including the Catholic Identity Conference, which takes place in Pittsburgh every year, and the Rome Life Forum, which is sponsored by Voice of the Family, which, to the best of my knowledge, it's, and maybe you know better than I do, it's a kind of a spinoff of Tradition, Family, and Property. It's every year in Rome. I don't know if he's scheduled this year, but Strickland's going there this year. Vigano's spoken at it. Burke has spoken at it. It's a who's who. Every week or so, you'll see either an interview from him or a new manifesto show up in LifeSite News or 1 Peter 5 or Crisis Magazine. And also, he's co-authored, as you know, you've seen many of these manifestos come out from Cardinal Burke or Vigano, and he's a co-signer regularly. Mm-hmm. He wrote one. He's also collaborated. He wrote one jointly with Cardinal Burke a couple of years ago. So, just to sort of paint, like this is the person who has decided to write a compendium, I guess is one of the words they've used, that's going to spell out the entire Catholic faith. Okay, well, we know where he's coming from. This book, Credo, it has endorsements from Bishop Joseph Strickland. At this point, that shouldn't be a surprise. But also, it has an endorsement from Cardinal Robert Serra and from Dr. Scott Hahn. I have written in the past about all three of these individuals, and I have pointed to their seeming increasing radicalization. I've gotten a lot of flack, especially for the latter two, who I have been assured support Pope Francis and are thoroughly mainstream. But in my opinion, I think, especially with the endorsement of this book, it's clear that that's not what's going on. This is, I think, the reason why this book is the most dangerous part about this book. Sophia Institute Press is located in the Diocese of Manchester in New Hampshire, and somehow they were able to acquire the imprimatur of the diocesan bishop. You write a Catholic book, a book on theology, a book on doctrine, catechism, catechesis manual. If you want an official certification that the book is orthodox, you get what is called, you either go to the local bishop of the publisher or the author. So, for example, Pedro Gabriel was able to get his local bishop or the bishop's delegate to give it a nihil obstat, which means, I don't know what the translation is, but it means it's free from error. It's basically, a lot of times bishops are too busy to read every book that comes into them, so they usually give it to a priest in their diocese who reads it, gives it a pass. There are no errors in there, or if there are errors, they'll write up a report, and then the imprimatur basically says, let it be printed. Now, it's not necessarily an endorsement of the book, it's an acknowledgement that the book is free from doctrinal error. Unfortunately, I think in this case, now there's no nihil obstat on this book. I don't know if the bishop reviewed it himself. I don't know if he just granted it an imprimatur because it was written by a brother bishop that he didn't know much about. I don't know the story. I have written a couple of emails and filled out the contact us page on the diocese requesting that Bishop Lebowski retracts the imprimatur, because with this on the book, it makes it a lot more difficult to challenge. They'll just say, look, the local bishop says it's orthodox. My hope is that it was just a case of neglect. I don't know. So here is the first problematic statement, is what I saw. This was posted on Twitter by Tom's Digest. He's an anonymous, I don't know. I guess he's a mischief maker. I don't want to say troll on Twitter, but he has a lot of interesting things to say about the goings on in the church. But number 224, and I have the Kindle edition, which doesn't correspond to the print edition, and the numbering is all mixed up. But these are screenshots from, I think the numbers restart in different sections. So, if you do a word search, you'll find it. But this question, is the dignity of the human person rooted in his creation in God's image and likeness? And Bishop Schneider's response is astounding. This was true for Adam, but with original sin, the human person lost his resemblance and dignity in the eyes of God. He recovers this dignity through baptism and keeps it as long as he does not sin mortally. And then the follow-up is, then human dignity is not the same in all persons. No, the human person loses his dignity in proportion to his free choice of error or evil, and he compares Hitler and St. Francis of Assisi. Now, I've been told that this is maybe reflective of Thomas Aquinas, but it ignores the last 120 years of Catholic teaching about human dignity. Just one example out of many in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 1700, the dignity of the human person is rooted in his creation in the image and likeness of God. Yes, there are ways that we can grow, but the dignity of the human person is intrinsic and inviolable. And this is taught very clearly in the documents of Vatican II, and it's taught very clearly in Evangelium Vitae, which was Pope John Paul II's 1994-1995 document on the gospel of life. It's like he's ignored the last 60 years of theological development so that he can say that unbaptized people don't have human dignity. And there are other passages in official church documents since then that do say that all people have equal human dignity. So my jaw dropped when I saw this. So this is when I shelled out. I saw the screenshot. I shelled out the $9.99 so I could read it, so you don't have to. But just to confirm, like, well, what else is this guy up to? And that is the exact same passage. So that's great. Okay. This here is a direct repudiation of, an explicit repudiation of the documents of the Second Vatican Council, talking about the creation of man. He writes, then man is not a creature that the Creator has willed for his own sake. And he writes, no, although man should never be used as a mere means to an end, the notion that man exists simply for his own sake is the self-referential error of anthropocentrism. And he condemns Immanuel Kant, and it goes on like that. His footnote says, the Council of Vatican II's document Gaudium et Spes 24 made the ambiguous affirmation that man is the only creature on earth that God has willed for its own sake. So he's saying this statement from the Vatican II document is ambiguous, but he also puts a clear no, which means that he thinks is wrong. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 357. Of all visible creatures, only man is able to know and love his Creator. He is the only creature on earth that God has willed for its own sake. I mean,
honestly, I can't see the ambiguity.
Oh yeah,
that word is a favorite used in this particular community. You can throw that at anything to try to get away with all sorts.
Oh yeah, and you see it about like the role of the papacy when they talk about Vatican I. They're like, oh well, when it's interpreted incorrectly, and it's like, but this is what it says, and your interpretation does not align with what it says. I think that he is using polite language to smooth over the harshness of his own beliefs and his own dissent. We go, then what happens to infants who die without baptism? And he says, having committed no personal sin, it seems unfitting that unbaptized infants should suffer the fate of those who are damned. And then he says, a widespread theological opinion holds that their exclusion from the beatific vision may not necessarily entail pain and suffering. Now, in other words, what he is doing is he is just, oh yeah, they don't get to see the beatific vision. They are not, there's no chance of their salvation, but maybe they go to limbo. Maybe they only have some pangs or whatever. A peaceful eternity of purely natural goods. In other words, he's affirming limbo and saying that the debate is how bad limbo really is, or how bad is the hell that unbaptized babies go to, is basically what he's talking about here, which goes against, of course, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which talks about the hope of salvation for unbaptized infants, and the International Theological Commission document from 2007 that was signed by Pope Benedict and given his full approval and spoken about by Pope Benedict, that this is where the church is now. Schneider is just pushing that out of the way, and let's go back to pre-Vatican II times.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here's another one. Canonizations of saints. Now, the way he frames this is kind of interesting. Are canonizations of saints undoubtedly infallible ex cathedra statements? Well, Are they ex cathedra statements? Those are usually about faith and morals. Really, the core question, the one that he should be asking, are canonizations of saints to be considered infallible? If he should even ask it at all, because this is pure speculation on his part. It's not doctrine. But he says no. And basically, he's saying that there's a widespread theological opinion. Okay, so this is where my mind is going, because I'm starting to sense an influence here. The person that most vociferously advances this hypothesis is Peter Kwasniewski. When Pope Paul VI was canonized, he wrote a lengthy essay saying why we should not and cannot regard Paul VI as a saint. He published a book, Are Canonizations Infallible? As I went through this book, I started to notice certain bugbears that bore a resemblance to the outspoken traditionalist Peter Kwasniewski, who we've written about plenty of times. I have a sense that maybe he was involved in the writing of this based on the topics that were chosen. But let's continue. Here are some other problematic statements. What was the key difference between Vatican II and all previous ecumenical councils? So he's setting Vatican II aside, saying it's totally different. The previous ecumenical councils formulated the doctrine of faith and morals in articles with the clearest possible assertions and in concise canons with anathemas to guarantee an unambiguous understanding of the true doctrine and protect the faithful from heretical influences within or outside the church. Vatican II, however, chose not to do this. Well, first of all, my understanding is that some of the early councils, we don't even have the acts from them, or we have like one or two paragraphs, or we have a saint or a pope having written a summary of the council that happened 20 years earlier. In terms of what was offered to the faithful, the riches of the teaching, the number of bishops, the extent of the scope of everything that was covered by the Second Vatican Council, it blows every other council away. I mean, I would say that Trent and Vatican II are probably the two most comprehensive councils that we've had in the history of the Church. Vatican I, if it hadn't been cut short, maybe would have fit into this category, but it was cut short. So Trent and Vatican II. But there's a motive here. And remember, he's thinking in the same way that we've already kind of established, that he's sympathetic to the views of the SSPX. Now let's look at the number of the next one.
I wasn't going to make that comment, but okay.
I am making that number because this to them is the key to everything that's wrong with the church today. Number 666 in his catechism. What was the approach of the Second Vatican Council? This council's basic approach was partly determined by a shift from primacy being given to the content of the faith to the methods of its explanation and proclamation. Such priority given to method, history, which is mutable, and the so-called pastoral approach resulted in certain doctrinally unclear or ambiguous affirmations in the church's documents. This is almost a thesis statement for radical traditionalism. I mean, unless you're a sedevacantist or, in some other, cultish group. But this is basically the way that they would summarize what the Second Vatican Council was and what it said. So, I smell a rat. Now, here's another one. This also kind of makes me think a little bit about Kwasniewski. But what are the most common errors about authority in the church? Various forms of conciliarism, limiting papal authority by the authority of bishops gathered in council. He talks about Gallicanism and statism, subjecting the authority of the Pope and bishops to civil power. But then he puts in magisterial positivism, receiving every word of a living Pope or bishop as inherently true, good, infallible, and necessary to obey. Now, that I don't know a single person who holds to that. Yet it is the straw man that is put together by Peter Kwasniewski and friends when they describe not ultramontanism, hyperpapalism. I'm sensing that there's something going on here. But this is obviously an attack on people who think that when the Pope teaches authoritatively on matters of faith and morals, which, notice, this is not. Anyway, this is it's ridiculous. Now, Protestantism, I think that his view is much closer to that, but that's a whole other story. Then we get into religious affairs. Number 560. Who are the Jews? And his definition is those who continue to observe certain aspects of the Mosaic law while rejecting its fulfillment in the revelation of the true Messiah, Jesus Christ, the incarnate Son of God. Now, I guess if stripped down to its bare bones, but it doesn't affirm, it's talking about observance rather than the Jewish people, the Jewish religion. And this is hinting towards, I would say, anti-Semitism.
It's imputing like an ill will or an understanding of something so that they can reject it. And
yes.
I guarantee you talk to anyone, they will not say, oh, I'm obviously rejecting something. It's
it has nothing to do with their self-understanding. And that's a good point. This actually reads a lot like what E. Michael Jones says. He suggests that every Jewish person above the age of reason has made a conscientious rejection of Christ. And it's like, so if you grow up in the middle of Brooklyn as an Orthodox Jew, and everyone you know is Jewish, and your whole school is Jewish, and your parents are Jewish, and you're raised Jewish, like, your identity is rooted in who you are is rooted in a repudiation? No, it's rooted in an embrace of your culture. It's rooted in your upbringing. It's rooted in your family and your people, in your links to the Holy Land.
Yeah, all of these other things, any other religion, Christianity included, is not presented as an obvious truth. That it's like what is obvious is what you are raised in.
Yeah, and so I don't think I included Buddhism and Hinduism. I think he equated them to paganism and demon worship and that sort of thing. But then Islam. So here these are a little bit smaller on the screen, but hopefully you can see them. Number 207 through 209. The first question: does the Muslim religion adore the one true God? His immediate answer is no. He says the Muslim religion rejects God's self-revelation as a Trinity and denies the divinity of Jesus Christ. And he says that the adoration proposed in this religion cannot be true, as every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. And then he adds, while an individual Muslim may incidentally adore God as creator, this would only be at the natural level, according to man's capacity for knowledge of God. And so then the follow-up is quoting, I believe, from Nostra Aetate in Vatican II, then Muslims do not adore the one and merciful God together with us Catholics. And he goes, no, Catholics consciously profess and adore one God in Trinity and Trinity in unity. Now, and then the next question is 209. Is it true to say that Muslims hold the faith of Abraham? And he goes, no, Abraham saw three and adored one and rejoiced in the vision of the future Redeemer. So I think what he's trying to say is that Abraham was, and pre-Christian Jews had an openness to the Trinity, as if he can read their minds, or that reflects their understanding of it. And even though Muslims, they direct their worship towards the God of Abraham, towards the God that is worshipped by Christians and Jews, that's their intention. Somehow they're still worshiping a false god or a demon or whatever else. I mean, I've seen this rhetoric. This goes against Nostra Aetate. Obviously, we have serious theological differences with Islam, but what we can all agree on is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Noah and Adam, the biblical God. yes, they have a distorted, I mean, we would consider their view disordered or distorted, or not, or maybe, to put a better way, doesn't include the fullness of the Catholic understanding. But we can say the same thing about Pentecostals or
Or even
Protestants.
half of our own history. We
Yeah,
didn't have the development or the inclusion of all of the truths that we're now trying to synthesize today and integrate today.
and we
So
we needed to. I mean, we needed to define the Trinity as a dogma for a reason. It was because Catholics were genuinely not sure,
it was
that this
not
is the
an
way it
obvious
goes.
point going all the way
Yeah.
back.
So,
So,
um, now here, this is just a screenshot of the footnotes, and I've highlighted 3 of them. Footnote 49: for this confusing assertion, see Council of Vatican II, Decree Unitatis Redintegratio. Sorry, I didn't
mhm.
practice that one. And then he says it was restated in the Catechism. And then in number 50,
Isn't
footnote
that called the
52.
fallacy of like special pleading or something?
Yeah. Well, and then right up front, footnote 52, a regrettable affirmation of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And then the next one, a confusing claim of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So this goes beyond um, subtlety. This is actually
Mhm.
saying that the Catechism and the documents of the Council are screwed up or don't resemble the real faith. If you look at this particular slide, for those who are watching, the top footnote mentions the Joint Declaration on Human Fraternity in Abu Dhabi from 2019. Well, he describes this as a papal heresy that needs to be corrected. And then footnote 55, he talks about, he quotes from a French Freemason, and he's trying to equate Pope Francis's Fratelli Tutti, his view of fraternity, human fraternity, with the Freemasonic view. In this particular presentation, I didn't even focus on the hits at Pope Francis. Like, it's funny, has a pope ever committed heresy, and it gives the list. There was Honorius, there was Vigilius, there was Pope John the 22nd, and then Pope Francis when he taught. I mean, it's that bad. It's really just, not only are those contested, but it's frightening. And that's my last slide. So thanks for viewing. Anyway,
Of a very brief overview on some initial glaring concerns. I remember watching those tweets and then just wondering, because I've had other people praise this book to me, and I'm like, well, I know the name. I'd be curious to see what's inside it. So I think this is a valuable overview. Thank you for the slides, because it gives us a sense of what they're trying to accomplish, what they hope they're doing.
yeah,
I mean, they believe they're saving the church, and yet that is a
but
job
this
exclusively retained to Christ and the Holy Spirit Himself, and
and this goes
His vicar.
beyond Pope Francis criticism. This
Right.
is like, if you are a JP2 conservative who has problems with Pope Francis, and you've been critical of him the whole time, this book should offend you. This book should offend your faith. This is
Mhm.
scandalous to pious ears, because it has explicit criticisms. I even saw a criticism of Pope Benedict in
Mhm.
there. I didn't share that particular slide, and I haven't read the whole thing, so
Yeah,
I
I'm sure
there
there's
could be
more.
more, but it's pretty egregious. So that's
Well, I think we'll be coming back to this topic in the
yes,
coming weeks. It's probably only going to pick up steam. So, well, let's wrap. Thank you, Mike. Thank you for the debrief. Thank you, friends, for watching. Links to the topics that are referenced are going to be in the description. The conversation is brought to you from smartcatholics.com. It's our free online community for millennials, creators, and learners. You can join the private Where Peter Is group to ask questions, share insights, suggest topics for next time.
yes, and please visit Where Peter Is to read articles, listen to podcasts, and to hear about what's going on in the church. And please support us on Patreon if you can.
Hit the like button and please subscribe to Where Peter Is so you never miss an episode of the Debrief.
God bless.